Before I get you on the Bodog poll question, and we go a little bit deeper into what is easily the most consequential day ever for the Vancouver Canucks franchise at the Hockey Hall of Fame, just your knee-jerk reaction. We talked about it all last week to Roberto Luongo and Daniel and Henrik Sedin all being first ballot Hall of Famers. All three big stars from that 2011 Stanley Cup final team get the call on their first availability.
Yeah, I'm thrilled for all of them. I just feel so privileged that the Sedins career and my time covering the Canucks, really, the jumping on point, and I'm still covering the Canucks, and they're still working for the Canucks, obviously, but as players, like I was there in Boston the day they were drafted. I saw them come into the National Hockey League. I was in Edmonton for their final game, and of course, the final home game will live on for all time. And just so many good memories of watching them do what they did best. And I've said it before, say it again, as good as they were on the ice, better people. And so I'm delighted that they seem to have found their niche now within the Canuck organization, and will carry on and have an influence there. But when you think of what they accomplished, and really they accomplished just about everything short of getting their hands on the Stanley Cup, they're Hall of Fame careers. And so it's just an amazing story. Identical twin brothers rising the heights that they did. And then I start to think back moments along the way, and I think of Henrik scoring his 1,000th point in the National Hockey League at home against Roberto Luongo, and that was a great moment there. Also taking back to that 2009-2010 season when Daniel suffered a foot injury in, I think it was early December, and people asked the question then, how's Henrik going to get by? How's Henrik going to survive? Can he be productive without Daniel?
Mm-hmm.
And all he did was become a goal scorer, which we know in the big picture he wasn't over the course of his career, but finished with 29 goals that year, 83 assists, 112 points, won the Art Ross, won the Hart. He was all right without his brother for that 19-game stretch.
Yeah, he sure was. And I'm just delighted. I mean, wrote the welcome mat Friday on, they had been so slighted over their careers, so many different ways, whether it was, cruel nicknames or, cruel radio interviews from the two Dallas players, or even in this market, Neil McRae, the late Neil McRae, calling them the sisters and whatnot.
Dave Bolland getting his jabs.
Yeah, exactly.
There.
Dave, really? Dave Bolland? You're forgotten. These guys will live in immortality in the Hockey Hall of Fame. But, and the national media was slow to respect them and, pick up on their genius. And, for forever it seemed like there was, and I know you have identical twin brothers, but for so long there, that seemed to be the fascination, right? That they're identical twins, not that they're tremendous hockey players. So I was I think it's incredibly validating that they got in on their first ballot. I think this rights some of the wrongs that they were subject to during the course of their Hall of Fame career. Okay, Jeff, now answer me the Bodog poll question, which for some is a little stickier. For some, it's straightforward. How should the Canucks honor Roberto Luongo now that he's in the Hockey Hall of Fame? We'll point out this is the second time that the Canucks have been scooped by the Hall of Fame on one of their players getting in before the number gets retired. Of course, Pavel Bure a number of years ago, and they responded by retiring the Russian Rockets number. What do you think they will do? What do you think they should do for Roberto at this stage of the game?
It's such a loaded question because I don't like the fact that the rafters are filling up with retired jerseys before the one banner that needs to hang in there. And, of course, that could have all changed on June 15th of 2011. But the longer they go without winning a Stanley Cup, these are great players, and it's been validated now by the Hockey Hall of Fame. And, of course, Daniel and Henrik are there already. Like I think you have to hang Roberto's number.
Yeah.
I do. When I think of what he meant to this organization and where he and, I mean, the others, obviously, where they were able to take this team. Like, we had seen good goaltenders. Richard Brodeur had a nice little run there, part of the 82 group. Kirk McLean, obviously, and it wasn't just 94. But Roberto elevated the craft. He did something that we just hadn't ever seen here in Vancouver, and he did it for a long stretch. And the numbers, again, on his numbers, when you look at what he accomplished in the National Hockey League, and I know it wasn't all here, his best years were here, 1,044 games, first of all, for a goaltender.
That's obscene.
489 wins, 77 shutouts, a career .919 save percentage on some bad teams.
Really bad teams in Florida. Like his first stint in Florida, they were grotesque.
Well, when he arrived here, those first couple of years, it was him and a bunch of guys. I mean, the Twins hadn't become the Twins yet.
That's right. The old AV line. Come on, Louie.
Seriously.
Are you going to win tonight?
And it was that on a lot of nights. So, I think I'm in the camp that thinks that they have really no choice. Yeah. And you're right.
Should they have done it by now, Jeff?
Did they probably should have.
Yeah. Now, Florida retired his number, what, just this?
I think so, last year.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there are a number of complications, as you point out. Number one, this is very much a Florida Panthers player more so than a Vancouver Canucks player. Now, we can sit here and say Roberto Luongo, the greatest Canuck goaltender of all time, and always consider him a Canuck and wants a Canuck and all those things, and that's perfectly legitimate. I think a neutral looks at it and says he's a Florida Panther who had a very successful stint in Vancouver when you think of the fact that he came from Florida and then went back to Florida. As you say, the Raptors are somewhat busy, as we all know. Kirk McLean, who wore the same number one as Roberto, is in the Ring of Honor already. And then, of course, and I've got some folks already on Twitter mentioning this to me, that, you know, the cap recapture penalty that the Vancouver Canucks were saddled with because Roberto chose to retire as opposed to going through the LTIR process and collecting all of his NHL player salary as opposed to collecting an executive salary with the Florida Panthers, saddled the Canucks over the last couple of years, and some Canucks fans are still feeling hurt by that, and I can understand. I mean, we've went through that issue time and again. It's the only such penalty levied against an NHL team for a cap recapture, and of course those contracts were perfectly legal the day that they were signed. It was vindictive retribution from the commissioner, Gary Bettman, no more, no less. But I'm with you. He's the best goaltender in franchise history. He backstopped the best teams in franchise history. You're allowed to celebrate your own history as you see fit, regardless of how many championships you have. You can't ever, you can't sit there and say, well, we can't do anything until we win a championship. Jeff, that could be 50 more years. You're going to celebrate your history and your great players and performers between now and whatever the day is. If it ever, we may never see it, where this franchise wins a Stanley Cup championship. So I've long been for retiring Roberto's number. I think you can say they missed the boat and should have retired it earlier. But I also think you probably, if you're the Canucks, have to show a little bit of deference to Florida here. I mean, unless you just say to hell with them. But, you're both member clubs in the NHL. I could understand why they would show a little bit of deference to Florida and allow them to do it first with Roberto Luongo. But I suspect that will come now. Do you think this is what's going to happen? I mean, I suspect Francesco and the ownership group will look at it and, much like they did with Pavel Bure, go, we have a legitimate Hall of Fame player here, and it's time to retire the number.
Yeah, and as you said, I mean, it's complicated on so many levels to the fact that Francesco had to go to Roberto's door to let him know what the plans were.
That's when they traded Corey Schneider, as you remember. Right, as opposed to Roberto.
And then the Heritage Classic. I mean, look, we all know the backstory here, but...
ask for the trade out.
It's a little murky at times, but you just hope that time sort of smooths all of these out. He has come back as a player. He was back with the Florida Panthers, and they put him on the Jumbotron, and he got the expected loot. People, the fans love him, most of them. Maybe the ones that hold the grudge about the recapture, notwithstanding. But through it all, I mean, if we're rewarding excellence at various positions and just in the pantheon of a franchise, then put me in the group that thinks that they ought to retire his jersey.
All right, and we'll hear from the particulars here in a bit on the show. Roberto Luongo, Daniel Sedin, Henrik Sedin, all first ballot Hockey Hall of Famers as of today. Frankly, I'm a little surprised that Henrik Zetterberg didn't join them, but they join From the National Hockey League player ranks, a Swedish flavor too, right? Daniel Alfredsson becomes the first modern-day player for the Ottawa Senators franchise. And really, when you look at the Vancouver Canucks in the Hockey Hall of Fame, everybody, in the player category, Daniel and Henrik were the first career Canucks to go in. And really, they're the only two Canucks who are solely identified with this franchise, or mostly identified with this franchise. We've talked about Pavel Bure, Roberto Luongo. You know, you're going to get some who view them as a Canuck. You're going to get some who view them as a Florida Panther. And you know, rightfully so. There's no right or wrong here. It's all in the eye of the beholder. But the other players to have gone on in to the Hall of Fame had bids with the Vancouver Canucks. And, of course, in Cam Neely's case, it was an unfortunate shortened bid with the Canucks before they moved him on to Boston. But Cam Neely, Igor Larionov, and we talked about Igor last week, comes on over to the Vancouver Canucks after playing for that Soviet Red Army team, but matriculates to Detroit, and I think really is probably viewed as a Detroit Red Wing in an NHL context. Of course, we all know and want to forget about the Mark Messier experiment here. And then there's Matt Sundin as well, who was here for a half season. You know, you have to go really to the executive ranks to find names like Bud Poyle and Jake Milford and, of course, Pat Quinn, who are associated as Canucks. And even some of them have some, you know, multiple claims on them. But you have to go to the executive ranks to really find, I think, dyed-in-the-wool Canucks who were in the Hockey Hall of Fame without much complication before today.